The laughter started before the human ship had even finished docking. Across the great assembly station, thousands of alien crews watched their screens light up with a single image. A ship had arrived through the transit gate, and it was the ugliest thing any of them had ever seen. Its hull was dull gray, patched in a dozen mismatched shades. Long scratches ran down its sides like old scars. One section near the back looked like it had been welded back together by hand. Where every coalition vessel gleamed like polished glass, this thing looked like it had been dragged across the bottom of a dead ocean. Someone on a nearby cruiser broadcast the image to the whole assembly with 3 simple words attached: a rust bucket. The name spread in seconds. By the time the human ship, called the Wayfarer, settled into its assigned berth, the entire station was sharing the picture and trading jokes about it. Crews leaned out of viewports to point and laugh. A few ships flashed their running lights in mockery, blinking out rude patterns. The coalition had seen many newcomers over the centuries, but never one that looked this poor, this old, this far behind. Inside the Wayfarer, Captain Dahl Rayner stood quietly and watched the same broadcasts the aliens were sharing. He was a lean man with gray at his temples and a face that gave nothing away. He read the insults without anger. He had expected them. Humanity was new to all this, and humans had learned long ago that the galaxy judged a ship by how it shined. "They're really enjoying themselves out there," said Sela Voss, the ship's chief engineer. She stood beside him with her arms crossed, watching the feeds. She had built half this ship with her own hands, and hearing them call it garbage made her jaw tighten. "We could shine the hull. One pass with the right tools and they'd stop." "No," Rayner said. "Let them laugh. A thing that laughs is a thing that isn't watching closely." Voss made a small sound, but she trusted him, so she said nothing more. The docking process finished with a soft thud. A coalition official appeared on the main screen, and his expression made it clear he had drawn the short straw in being assigned to the humans. He was tall and thin, with smooth blue skin and eyes that flicked over the ship's interior with open distaste. "Human vessel," he said, "you are granted provisional observer status. This is the lowest rank the coalition offers. You may watch the assembly, you may not vote, you may not speak unless invited. Do you understand these terms?" In the small meeting room behind the bridge, Ambassador Oren Kale leaned toward his own screen. He was an older man, calm and patient, and he had spent his whole career being talked down to by people who thought they were better than him. He had stopped letting it bother him a long time ago. "We understand," Kale said simply. "We're grateful for the chance to observe." The official seemed almost disappointed that the humans had not argued. He cut the connection without another word. The real trouble came an hour later. The assembly hall was a vast circle of floating platforms, each one holding a delegation from a different species. At the center stood Prime Speaker Talon, the leader of the coalition, an elegant figure draped in silver cloth, her voice smooth and measured. She welcomed several new trade partners. She settled a small border dispute. And then a hard voice cut across the chamber. "Prime Speaker, before we continue, I would raise a matter." The speaker was Warden Igrith, the head of the coalition's military wing. He was broad and armored, and his voice carried the flat certainty of someone who had never lost an argument. He gestured, and the image of the Wayfarer appeared above the center of the hall, slowly turning, every scar and patch on display for all to see. "This," Igrith said, "is the vessel that the human species sent to represent themselves before us. Look at it. Look closely. We measure a civilization by what it can build. We have always done so, and this is what they build." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the platforms. "I move that humanity's observer status be revoked," Igrith went on. "Not out of cruelty, out of standards. We cannot lower the dignity of this body by seating a species that arrives in a wreck. Let them return when they have something worth showing us." Talon raised a hand for quiet. She looked at the slowly turning ship and her face showed nothing but mild curiosity. "The motion is noted, Warden. It will be discussed. The humans may remain as observers until the matter is settled." It was not a victory for the humans. It was barely even mercy. But Igrith smiled all the same, certain the vote would go his way. A species this far behind had no defenders here. Back aboard the Wayfarer, the crew had watched the whole thing in silence. "They want to throw us out before we've even unpacked," Voss said. Kale only nodded slowly, his eyes still on the screen where the ship turned and turned for the amusement of strangers. Rayner watched it too, and the faint line of a smile touched the corner of his mouth, though there was no humor in it. "They're looking at the paint," he said quietly. "They have no idea what's under it." He turned away from the screen. "Tell the crew to rest. Say nothing, answer nothing, correct nothing. When the moment comes, the ship will speak for itself." Outside, across the great station, the laughter had not stopped. It would soon, but not yet. Not until the galaxy learned what the rust bucket truly was. The alarm tore through the assembly 3 days later, and it had nothing to do with the humans. A coalition survey expedition had been studying a dying star at the edge of the system, a swollen red giant in the final stage of its collapse. 6 ships had gone out, crewed by some of the coalition's brightest scientists. Their last message arrived broken and full of static. The star was collapsing faster than any model had predicted. The space around it was tearing itself apart. Then the signal cut off completely, and the expedition went silent. The assembly hall, which moments before had been arguing about trade routes, fell into chaos. 200 coalition scientists were out there, and the window to save them was closing fast. Talon moved quickly. She ordered the coalition's finest rescue cruisers to launch at once. These were beautiful ships, sleek and powerful, the pride of the fleet. They raced toward the dying star with their engines blazing, and the whole assembly watched their progress on the great central display. They did not get far. The collapsing star was throwing out waves of gravity so violent that space itself rippled like water. The coalition called it gravitational shear, and it was a death sentence. The first cruiser to reach the edge of it began to groan. Its hull buckled. Warning lights flooded its bridge. The captain pulled back at the last second, and the ship limped away with cracks running down its frame. The others did not even try. They held at a safe distance, helpless, while the trapped expedition's life signs grew weaker by the minute. "We cannot reach them," the lead rescue captain reported, his voice tight with shame. "The shear will crush anything we send. We need time to design new shielding, days at least." "They don't have days," Talon said softly. "They have hours." It was then that a small request appeared on her console. A polite, simple message from the human ship. "The Wayfarer requests permission to assist." Warden Igrith laughed out loud when he saw it. "The rust bucket wants to help. Of course it does." He turned to the assembly. "Their wreck will be torn to pieces before it gets halfway. Let them go and embarrass themselves. Perhaps then they will finally leave." Talon did not laugh. She studied the message for a long moment. She had no reason to believe the humans could do what her own finest ships could not. But she had 200 people dying, and pride was a poor reason to refuse any hand. "Permission granted," she said. Aboard the Wayfarer, Captain Rayner gave the order without ceremony. "Take us in, Sella." Sella Voss was already at her station, her hands moving across controls she knew better than her own heartbeat. "Hull's ready. She'll hold." The old gray ship detached from its berth and turned toward the dying star. On the assembly screens, it looked even worse in motion, a battered shape limping toward certain death. The coalition crews watched, and some of them prepared to laugh again. The Wayfarer reached the edge of the shear zone, the same wall of tearing gravity that had cracked the proud cruiser. It did not slow down. The old ship slid into the violence as if entering still water. The assembly leaned forward as one. The hull of the Wayfarer did not buckle or groan. Instead, as the gravity waves struck it, the plating seemed to shift and flex, bending with the forces instead of fighting them, riding the ripples the way a swimmer rides a current. The coalition sensors screamed with confusion. Nothing they understood about ships allowed for this. A hull was supposed to be rigid and strong. This one was alive. Deeper and deeper the Wayfarer went, into a place where light itself bent and twisted, where every coalition ship would have been crushed to dust. Voss guided it through with small, patient movements, reading the chaos like a familiar road. "There," she said, "I have them." The expedition's 6 ships were wrecked and tumbling, their crews packed into failing escape pods, minutes from the end. The Wayfarer slowed among them, opened its great cargo bays and gathered them in. One by one, every pod was drawn safely inside. 200 lives, pulled from the mouth of a collapsing star. Then the old ship turned and rode the waves back out, emerging from the sheer zone whole and undamaged, with the entire missing crew alive aboard. The assembly hall was utterly silent. The laughter was gone. Every alien on every platform stared at the screens, where the rust bucket they had mocked for 3 days now floated calmly beside the dying star, carrying the survivors that the coalition's greatest ships could not reach. Talon rose slowly from her seat. "Human vessel," she said, and for the first time her smooth voice carried a tremor of something close to awe. "Explain to this assembly how you did what we could not." On the bridge of the Wayfarer, surrounded by the rescued and the saved, Captain Rayner looked at the screen. He could have explained. He could have told them everything. Instead, he simply gave a small, polite smile, the same one he had worn while they laughed at his ship. "We're glad they're safe," he said. "We'll be returning the survivors to your medical station shortly." And he closed the channel. Warden Igrith stood frozen on his platform, the smile wiped clean from his face. Around him, the whispers had already begun, and they were no longer whispers of mockery. They were whispers of fear. By the next morning, the docking bay around the Wayfarer was crowded with coalition scientists, and not one of them was laughing. They came with every instrument they had. They scanned the old ship from every angle, fired sensor beams across its hull, took readings of its drive, and measured energy patterns no one had ever recorded before. They worked for hours, and the longer they worked, the more confused they became. The hull was the first mystery. Their scanners could not name the material. It was not metal, not ceramic, not any alloy in the Coalition's vast records. When they ran their analysis, the machine simply returned an error, as if the substance did not fit into any category the galaxy had ever defined. One scientist scanned a single scratched panel 40 times and got 40 different readings. The drive was worse. Coalition propulsion worked on principles every species had agreed upon for 1,000 years. There were a handful of ways to move a ship through space, and all of them were known, mapped, and perfected. The Wayfarer's drive matched none of them. Its signature did not even resemble the others. It was as if the humans had taken a completely different road, one the Coalition had never thought to walk. A senior researcher brought her findings to Prime Speaker Talon in her private chamber. She set down her data and struggled to find the words. "Prime Speaker, I have studied ships my entire life. That vessel should not work. By everything we know, it should not even hold together. And yet it flew into a collapsing star and came back without a scratch." She paused. "I do not understand it. None of us do." Talon listened in silence. Then she summoned the humans to speak before the full assembly. This time the chamber was packed and quiet. When Ambassador Oren Kale stepped onto the central platform, no one mocked him. Every delegation watched and waited. "You have questions," Kale began. "I will try to answer them, but first you must understand where we come from." He told them the story plainly. Humanity, he said, had spent most of its history completely alone. No coalition had found them. No advanced species had shared its knowledge. For generation after generation, Humans were cut off in their corner of the galaxy, facing problems with no one to ask for help. And so they did the only thing they could. They solved those problems themselves. When a wall stood in our way, Kale said, we had no one to tell us it could not be climbed. So we climbed it. When the galaxy decided a certain path led nowhere and turned back, we never heard that decision. We kept walking that path because we did not know we were supposed to stop. He let that sit for a moment. 1,000 years ago, your coalition reached a wall too. Your records will show it. A point where your science said this far and no further. You declared it a dead end, and you turned your efforts toward making your existing designs more beautiful, more polished, more refined. That was a reasonable choice. He looked around the hall. We never made that choice. We never knew the wall was there, and so we walked straight through it. Selava stepped forward beside him, and she spoke about the ship itself. You laughed at how it looks, she said, without anger. I understand. You build your ships to shine because to you shining means strength. We build ours to last. What you called rust is armor. It looks worn because it is meant to take damage and heal itself. Every scratch you mocked is a wound the ship already survived. We do not polish our ships. We trust them. The chamber was still. Many of the aliens were looking at the slowly turning image of the Wayfarer with entirely new eyes. The thing they had called a wreck now looked like something they did not have the wisdom to judge. But not everyone was moved. Warden Igrith rose from his platform, his voice sharp and hard. This is a performance, he said, a clever trick. They hide some borrowed technology under a layer of filth and tell us a pretty story about walls and roads. I have heard enough fairy tales. He turned to Talon. Prime Speaker, I demand that the human ship be impounded at once and taken apart for proper inspection. If their technology is real, then the Coalition has a right to examine it. If it is stolen, we will find the truth inside. A murmur ran through the hall. Some delegations nodded along with him. The idea of simply taking what the humans had was tempting to more than a few. Talon looked at Igrith for a long, cold moment. The Coalition does not seize the ships of its guests, she said. We do not strip a vessel because we do not understand it. That is the act of pirates, not of a governing body. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the chamber. Your demand is denied, Warden. The Wayfarer stays as it is, untouched. Igrith's jaw tightened, but he sat down. Aboard the human ship, Captain Rayner watched the exchange and let out a slow breath. He's not going to let it go, he said quietly. Kale, returning to the bridge, nodded in agreement. No, men like him would rather break a thing than admit they cannot match it. Rayner looked out at the great station, at the thousands of gleaming ships that had laughed and now watched in uneasy silence. Then we should be ready, he said, for the day he stops asking. Warden Igrith stopped asking that very night. He did not bring his plan before the assembly. He knew Talon would refuse him again, and he had no patience left for votes and speeches. He was a soldier, and soldiers took what talk could not win. While the station slept, he gathered a strike team of his most loyal officers and 4 of the Coalition's heaviest warships, and he gave them a simple order. Board the human wreck, take its secrets by force, and bring him whatever they found inside. The 4 warships pulled away from the station in the dark and formed a tight ring around the Wayfarer, their weapons charged, their boarding craft prepared to launch. Igrith opened a channel to the human ship, his voice flat and certain. Human vessel, your ship is now under Coalition seizure. Power down and open your bays, or we will open them for you. You have 1 minute. On the bridge of the Wayfarer, the crew came awake fast. Selavas read the 4 warships surrounding them, their weapons hot and ready. He actually did it, she said. He's going to fire on us. Captain Rayner stood calm at the center of the bridge. He opened the channel. Warden, he said evenly, stand down. You don't want to do this. Our ship can defend itself, and I would very much rather it didn't have to. Take your ships home, and we'll forget this happened. Igrith only laughed. Threats from a rust bucket, time is up. The 4 warships fired all at once. The assembly station woke to alarms. Talon was pulled from her rest to see the impossible on her screens. Igrith had launched an unauthorized attack on a guest of the Coalition, and the great central display showed it all. Beams and projectiles slammed into the Wayfarer from every side, a barrage that should have torn any ship to pieces. The old gray hull lit up under the impacts, and then before the eyes of the entire Coalition the damage began to heal. Where the weapons struck, the armor glowed, softened, and flowed back into place, sealing every wound as fast as it was made. The Wayfarer did not break. It did not even slow. It simply absorbed the assault, its living hull knitting itself closed again and again, while it made no move to strike back. "Hold fire," Igrith shouted, staring at his readouts. "Why isn't it taking damage? Hit it again, all weapons." The warships poured everything they had into the human ship. It made no difference. The Wayfarer floated calm in the storm, healing faster than they could harm it, and still it did not raise a single weapon in return. Rayner opened the channel one last time. His voice had not changed. It was still quiet, still patient. "Warden Igrith, look at your sensors. You cannot hurt this ship. I'm asking you again as a courtesy. Stop. Because the next move is mine and I take no pleasure in it." Igrith's pride would not let him stop. "Destroy it," he screamed. "Whatever it costs, tear it apart." Rayner closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them. "Sella," he said, "the pulse, weapons only, hurt no one." Voss's hands moved across her station. "Yes, Captain." The Wayfarer did not fire a beam or launch a missile. Instead, a single ring of pale light rippled outward from its hull, expanding in perfect silence across the dark. It washed over the 4 Coalition warships like a wave passing through water. And every weapon in Igrith's fleet went dead. Not damaged, not destroyed, simply switched off as if a hand had reached into each ship and turned a key. The warship's guns powered down. Their targeting systems went dark. Their engines coughed and died. In the space of a single breath, the 4 greatest vessels in Igrith's command became helpless metal shells, drifting and silent, unable to fire, unable to move, unable to do anything at all. But no one was hurt. Not a single crew member aboard those ships was harmed. Their life support held. Their lights stayed on. The Wayfarer had reached out and disarmed an entire battle fleet without spilling one drop of blood. The assembly hall was in stunned uproar. Delegations who had laughed at the rust bucket only days before now stared at their screens in open terror. The old ship they had mocked had just shrugged off a full assault and switched off a war fleet like a child blowing out a candle, and it had chosen, deliberately, to harm no one. That choice was the most frightening part of all. It meant the humans could have done far worse and simply decided not to. Talon's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and furious, aimed at her own officer. "Warden Igrith, you attacked a guest of this coalition without my order and without the Assembly's consent. You have shamed us before a power we do not understand." She turned to her guards. "Arrest him, now." Igrith was dragged from his platform, shouting that he had been protecting them, that the humans were a danger, that someone had to act. No one listened. They were all watching the Wayfarer, which floated quietly amid 4 dead warships, its hull already smooth and whole, having never once tried to kill. On the bridge, Rayner let out a slow breath and sat down at last. "Restore power to their ships," he said softly. "Let them limp home. We've made our point." Voss did as he asked, and one by one the warships flickered back to life, their crews shaken but alive. Humanity, which had been moments from expulsion, now held the entire assembly in the palm of its hand, and every eye in the coalition was on the rust bucket, waiting to see what it would do next. A request came to the Wayfarer the following day, and it was unlike any that had come before. Prime Speaker Talon wished to come aboard the human ship herself, alone, with no guards and no scientists. She wished only to see and to understand. Captain Rayner agreed at once. She arrived quietly, the silver-clad leader of the coalition stepping through the airlock of the ship her own people had called a wreck. Up close, the inside of the Wayfarer surprised her. It was plain and worn, yes, but it was also clean and solid and warm, a place clearly built by people who cared more for what worked than for what looked impressive. Sela Voss met her and offered to show her the ship, and Talon accepted. They walked through the corridors together. Voss did not boast. She simply explained, honestly, the way a person explains something they love. She showed Talon the engine room where the strange drive hummed quietly. She showed her the hull systems, the living armor that healed itself. And as they walked, she explained the thing that no scientist had been able to figure out. Your whole coalition, Voss said, is built on one idea. A single belief about how the universe works passed down so long ago that none of you remember learning it. You all inherited it together, and it was almost right. Right enough to build everything you have. But it was wrong in one small way, at one deep level, and because every one of you started from the same wrong idea, every one of you hit the same wall 1,000 years ago. Talon stopped walking, and you did not inherit this idea. We had no one to inherit it from, Voss said. We were alone. So when we started building, we started from nothing from the very beginning, asking the simplest questions ourselves. And somewhere along the way, we asked the one question your ancestors never thought to ask because they already thought they knew the answer. She gestured around at the ship. This is what comes from that one different question. 1,000 years past your wall, and the strangest part is, we never knew it was special. To us, it is just how ships are built. Talon stood in silence for a long time. She was a leader of great wisdom, and she understood what she was hearing. The coalition had not been outpaced by a richer or stronger people. It had been outpaced by a poorer, lonelier one, simply because that lonely people had never been told what was impossible. Her great civilization had spent 1,000 years polishing the same designs, making them prettier, never once realizing that the road forward had been there the whole time, and that they had simply chosen to stop walking it. It was a humbling thought, and Talon was honest enough to feel it fully. They returned to a common room where Ambassador Kale waited. He poured a drink for the prime speaker, and the three of them sat together. You could keep all of this to yourselves, Talon said at last. With what I have seen today, humanity could rule this galaxy. No one could stop you. Your ship alone proved that. Why have you not? Kale set down his own cup. Because we know what it is to be alone, he said. We spent our whole history with no one to help us. We climbed every wall by ourselves in the dark, and it was hard and it was lonely and it cost us more than you can imagine. He looked at her steadily. We did not come here to rule you. We came here to share. We want to show you the way past your wall so that no one ever has to climb it alone again. That is the only reason we came at all. Talon felt the weight of those words settle over her. It was a gift greater than any the coalition had ever been offered, the chance to leap forward 1,000 years, freely given by a people they had laughed at and attacked. But she was wise, and she saw the danger too. There will be those who fear this, she said slowly. My people have believed for 1,000 years that they stand at the peak of all knowledge. You will tell them that a species in a rust bucket has surpassed them. Some will not be able to bear it. Pride is a deep wound, Ambassador. Some would rather destroy what shames them than learn from it. The warden was only the first. We know, Kale said quietly. We saw his kind in our own history many times. That is why we did not force anything. The choice has to be yours. We can open the door. We cannot make your people walk through it. Talon looked from the diplomat to the engineer, and then around at the worn, honest ship that held more wisdom than her entire fleet. Then the choice falls to me, she said, and I will not let pride decide the future of every species under my care. She rose to her feet, and there was new resolve in her bearing. Tomorrow I will stand before the full assembly, she said, and I will tell them the truth, all of it, with nothing softened, that the people we mocked are ahead of us, that they came not to conquer but to lift us, and that the only foolish thing we could do now is turn away the greatest gift our galaxy has ever been offered." She turned to leave, then paused at the door and looked back at them. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not being what we would have been in your place." And she stepped out into the corridor, carrying with her the heaviest and most hopeful decision of her long life. The full assembly gathered the next day, and not a single seat was empty. Word of what had happened had spread to every corner of the coalition. Every delegation knew that something was about to change, and the great hall buzzed with tension as prime speaker Talon took her place at the center. She did not begin with soft words. She had decided there would be no more comfortable lies. "For 1,000 years," she said, her voice carrying to every platform, "we have believed that we stand at the height of all knowledge. We measured every new species against ourselves and found them lacking. We laughed at a ship because it did not shine." She let the silence stretch. "We were wrong, about all of it." She told them everything. She told them about the wall their ancestors had struck 1,000 years ago, and how they had turned back and called it the end of the road. She told them how humanity, alone and unaided, had never known to stop, and had walked a full 1,000 years past the place where the coalition gave up. She told them what she had seen aboard the Wayfarer, the living hull, the impossible drive, the simple honesty of a people who had built greatness and never thought to brag about it. "They could have ruled us," she said. "After what we did to them, after we mocked them and attacked them, they could have taken everything. Instead, they offered to share it. They came to lift us past our wall so that no one in this galaxy ever has to climb alone again." She looked slowly around the chamber. "The only question before us is whether we are wise enough and humble enough to accept." The reaction was not gentle. Several delegations rose in anger, their pride too deeply wounded to bear the truth. They argued that it was a trick, that no species should be allowed to stand above the coalition, that accepting humanity's gift would mean admitting their own failure. Their voices were loud. But the evidence was louder. The images played again on the great display. The Wayfarer riding into a collapsing star and returning with 200 saved lives. The old hull healing under a full barrage. The ring of light that had switched off a war fleet without harming a soul. No speech could argue against what every delegation had watched with their own eyes. Slowly, one by one, even the proudest delegations fell quiet. The truth was simply too large to shout down. When the matter came to a vote, it was not close. Humanity was granted full standing in the coalition. No longer observers, no longer guests to be tolerated. Equals with a voice and a vote, welcomed as partners in lifting the whole galaxy forward. There was one more matter to settle. Warden Igrith was brought before the assembly in chains, the soldier who had attacked a guest and shamed them all. Many expected a harsh sentence, but it was Ambassador Kale who rose to speak. "Strip him of his rank," Kale said. "He misused it and he should not hold it again, but do not throw him away." He looked at the bound warden. "He acted out of fear, and fear comes from not understanding, so give him a chance to understand. Let him learn instead of command. A man who learns can change. A man who is only punished only grows harder." The assembly agreed. Igrith was stripped of his title, but he was offered a place among the students who would learn from the humans rather than the officers who would fear them. For a long moment the proud soldier said nothing. Then, slowly, he bowed his head and accepted. It was the first humble thing he had done in his life, and it was a beginning. In the days that followed, the great station changed. Coalition engineers no longer pointed and laughed at the Wayfarer. They lined the docks around it instead, studying every line of its worn hull with quiet reverence, taking careful notes, asking humble questions. Selava spent her days teaching them, patient and generous, watching minds that had been stuck for 1,000 years begin to move forward again. The Rust Bucket had become the most respected ship in the entire system. At last the time came for the Wayfarer to return home. Captain Rayner stood on the bridge as the crew made ready to depart. Talon came to see them off, and she clasped Kale's hand in the human fashion she had learned. "You have changed the future of every species I lead," she said. "I do not have words enough to thank you." "You changed it yourself," Kale answered. "We only opened the door. You were brave enough to walk through it." The Wayfarer detached from its berth, and this time the whole station watched in honor. The ships that had blinked rude patterns now flashed their lights in salute as the old gray vessel turned toward the transit gate. On the bridge, Selava stood beside her captain and watched the gleaming fleet fall away behind them. "They spent 3 days laughing at her," she said softly, resting a hand on the worn console of the ship she had built. "And now they'll spend 1,000 years catching up." Rayner smiled, the first full smile he had worn since they arrived. "Set a course home, Sella," he said. The old ship slipped into the gate and was gone, carrying the oldest human truth back out into the stars. Never judge a thing by how it shines. Judge it by what it endures, and by what it chooses to do when it could do anything at all. And the galaxy that had mocked the rust bucket would never make that mistake again.